You can't understand the sufferings of John Bunyan if you don't understand the political and religious situation that brought it about, or a lot of it about. William Laud, Bishop Laud, teamed up with Charles I to resist the parliamentary pressures to gain freedom for the Puritans, so that they wouldn't have to bow to the Book of Common Prayer or experience episcopal ordination. And so there began to be a very dangerous cleavage between monarchy, Charles I, and his religious lackey, William Laud, and the Parliament, with Oliver Cromwell coming onto the scene and being elected to the Parliament in 1640, I think it was. A civil war broke out between these two groups. People loyal to the king, people loyal to Parliament. The one wanting religious freedom for people like the Puritans, and not just them, and the other saying that the Church of England should be the state church and there shouldn't be nonconformity with any freedom. Well, Oliver Cromwell was a great leader, and there was a triumph, and Laud was beheaded in 1645. And you need to hear that with the kind of trembling, as though you heard that President Clinton was beheaded this afternoon. Beheaded. Not shot. Beheaded. You need to feel this, because this is the atmosphere in which these Puritans are going to be ministering. People were beheaded. Kings. The king, 5 years later, was beheaded. The king was beheaded. And then Cromwell reigned, and Presbyterianism reigned. The Westminster Assembly was gathered earlier. It finished its work in 1646, and now we had the Confession and the Catechism, and it defined the Presbyterian life in England in those days, and has to this day. Great freedom was given. Jews were excluded from the island of England in 1290, and not a Jew was allowed to be in England, and they were welcomed back under Cromwell in 1655 in particular. He died. 1658, he died. So that little period there, the Commonwealth, 1645 roughly to 58, great freedom for the Puritans and other people in England. When he died, his brother Richard tried to do it, and he couldn't do it. He was not a leader. Now, you know what happens when you have weak leadership in a country. There's a lot of chaos. There begins to be instability. And what do people want when there's instability? At all costs, they want stability. And they'll take it with a king or a dictator or however they can take it. And so they welcome back Charles II, the son of Charles I, and it's called the Restoration. The restoration of monarchy, 1660. And that's the year Bunyan went to jail. So there's a correlation there, because with the restoration of monarchy came the restoration of Episcopalism and the Act of Uniformity in 1662, which in August of that year put 2,000 Puritan pastors out of their churches who would not bow to Episcopal ordination or to the Book of Common Prayer. Now, those were the days of John Bunyan's life. The 1660 and the next 18 years that he lived to the end of his life in 1688 were more or less dangerous. Sometimes okay, sometimes threatened, but never anything like we have today, with such security to be taken for granted that you couldn't be assured that there wouldn't be a bloody assize like there was in 1685, where the sheriffs killed 300 Puritans. As a boy, he learned the trade of tinker. He used the phrase brazier in his will. It means a metal worker, somebody who fixes plows and yokes and other metal instruments with forge and hammer. That was his trade. He was poor. He had only a grade school education. He said, I simply learned to read and write. He had absolutely no higher education and no theological education. His notable sufferings began as a teenager. He was 15 years old. It's 1644. Remember the dates now. Here comes this tremendous national upheaval. A civil war is ready to break out. And he's 15 years old. And his mother dies. And a month later, his 13-year-old sister dies. And to make matters worse, his father remarries within a month. He turns 16 and he's drafted for 2 years into Cromwell's army. So within a space of 2 or 3 months, he loses his mother as a 15-year-old, he loses his sister as a 13-year-old, and he's swept away from his home as a 16-year-old now, and he may or may not have seen active service, but we know one story where he was called upon to be a sentinel, and a man said, I'd rather take your place, you take mine, and the man was killed with a musket ball through the head. And so he got at least that close to military activity. This is a 16-year-old boy who just lost his mother. He comes home. He is not a believer. He writes about himself, I was the very ringleader of all the youth that kept me company in all manner of vice and ungodliness. He married. He was 20 years old, or 21, and we never learned the name of his first wife. It's a remarkable thing. She bore him 4 children, and the first one was blind at birth, Mary. So his marriage, which might have been a relief to him from the sufferings of the earlier teen years, proves to enter with a tremendous burden. And the burden, of course, in our day, we've had that happen in our church, is great. Then, picture what it might have been for a young woman who had all the burden of a household and a blind daughter, baby daughter, to care for. And then 3 more children follow back to back. And then when he's thrown into prison, she's 10 years old. And he said it was like pulling skin from his bones to leave his daughter, blind daughter, alone with his wife with no means to care for them. So he made laces in prison and things like that. But she brought with her to this marriage, this pagan man's life, 2 books. That was her entire bringing. One was called The Plain Man's Pathway to Heaven, and the other was called The Practice of Piety. And she told stories of her godly father, and he began to read these books, and he began to be awakened. Mary, Elizabeth, John, Thomas were the names of his children. And in his first 5 years of marriage, he was profoundly converted. Now, the process of the conversion was agonizing. And when you read Grace Abounding, get it if it's up there. It's a little short book, 120 pages. It is very frustrating to read. There are no dates in it. You can't tell when anything is happening. And you can't tell what he thinks is his conversion, because it seems to happen several times. And then he experiences these extraordinary temptations, and then he thinks he's committed the unforgivable sin and drops into despair and depression for 2 years, and then he begins to come out. But most of the biographers seem to make this the decisive moment. And they're probably right. So let me read you the decisive moment. There were several good moments, but they seem to be followed by drifting away. And I don't know what he thought about those. One day, he's about 25 years old here, I suppose. One day, as I was passing into the field,